Welcome to the Common Sense Show. So it's happening again. Minimum wage is going up, and it has the potential to crush businesses, put people out of work, and cause massive chaos. And I'm talking about it tonight on the show. If you are on the West Coast, if you've already gone through the song and dance, if you even watched my last video about the $20 minimum wage hike in California, then you know probably what I'm going to say in tonight's video. You can check that out in the description if you haven't yet, though. But we're talking tonight about the $20 minimum wage, go over $20 minimum wage in Seattle. So let's get cracking. All right, so welcome to the Common Sense Show, and tonight we're just going to go right into it, and we're going to essentially the frustration of a lot of these Seattle business owners, and we're going to break down the Seattle minimum wage hike, the effect that it's having on the people out in Seattle, and I'm going to get your thoughts as we go through this live stream. So let's get cracking. Let me just put the screen up. So here we go again with the minimum wage hike. Now, listen, I am not the kind of person. Let me just start with this. I have heterodox views, right? So I'm not on either side of any of these issues, but I'm for a kind of plain truth. Whatever is the closest to the truth is what I go for. And the truth is that if you look at basic economics, the first rule of basic economics, or economics generally speaking, is that people face trade-offs, and that another rule of economics, in fact, the third rule of economics, are that um, that rational people tend to think on the margins, and then people respond to incentives. So all of these things are at play when a minimum wage goes up. And it's funny because I was talking to some pro minimum wage friends of mine's, and one of the things that I noticed is their argument with minimum wage going sky high is that they're perfectly okay with sacrificing some jobs, which is fair enough. That's their prerogative. But they were perfectly okay with sacrificing some jobs so that the wages of the people who would benefit from the minimum wage goes up. And I think it's going to come down to basically what you personally, or how you personally feel about this kind of change. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about what the change in the Seattle's minimum wage is actually going to be, and like what it went up to, which is kind of crazy. So the minimum wage for Seattle has gone up to $20.76 per hour. All right, so $20.76 per hour. It was previously $17, roughly around $17, I believe, and 25 cents per hour. So it went up about $3.50. And now you may have heard in one of the clips that there are two things happening right now that business owners are frustrated with and maybe employees are frustrated with. And it's important for you to understand what the two things that are happening right now actually is. So the first thing is obviously that the minimum wage took effect. Now, you should also know that the minimum wage, this is a plan that went into effect back in 2015. So this is not like this was just overnight that it went into effect, or that people didn't know was going to effect. They signed a progressive increase in the minimum wage for Seattle back in 2015. And then if you look at a chart that shows from Seattle.gov in their business affairs section, it actually shows what the progressive minimum wage is going to go up to in about 10 years. And I have that for us to look at tonight as well. But in 2025, there are two things happening right now that kind of completely disrupt the landscape. And I just want to give it to you straight. And when you watch this video, you can make your own comment, or even now you can chat and let me know what you think about the other things that actually go with this. So as the minimum wage is going up, there's also an expiring tip exemption. Now, what does that mean? What is the tip exemption that's expiring? Well, prior to the minimum wage going up, when the minimum wage was set at $17.25, a employer, technically the minimum wage prior to it going up to $20.76 was $19 and some change. But if in a restaurant, an employer would get an exemption of that $2, or in this case, with the minimum wage going up to $20, $3.50, if the employee was getting tips. So in other words, when a person came in and tipped the waiter or waitress in a restaurant, and that person who was getting tipped in the restaurant made, let's say, $17 an hour, if they got tips that amounted to them making about $20 an hour or more, then those tips were an exemption from the business owner coming out of pocket that extra $3.50. So essentially, you have $17 and some change that the employee was making. The business owner wouldn't have to pay the extra $3. The city would give an exemption on the extra $3 pay, assuming that the tips that were coming in raised that person's per hour average wage to the $20.76 now, or last year $19, and I think it was like 90 cents or something like that, or 80 cents. So what you're going to hear about in some of these other videos that these business owners are talking about, I said business. You know, sometimes, you know, that if you're watching this and you're black and you know about business, then you kind of know why I said it. But usually I say business, but for this stream I said business. My bad. Actually, I'm not that ashamed to say business, but getting back to it, here's the reality. The reality is that what's happening now is that these small business owners don't have the exemption anymore because that's expiring, which means that they're going to have to pay the full wage. So I'm going to ask a question that I want you to actually answer in a minute, because I want you kind of thinking about what this means for patrons of the business. And it means several things. Again, remember the principles of economics. People face trade-offs. Rational people think on the margins, and people respond to incentives. Those are 3 of the 10 principles of economics that are at play here. And this is going to essentially affect the people who buy and shop at those restaurants, the consumers, the workers, the employees, everyone across the board. There's going to be a response. So let's take a look at the next story that I found. I think this was pretty good, and we'll talk about that. So another story of how minimum wage impacts businesses. I mean, the reality is that people lose their jobs when minimum wage goes up, and there is going to be a corresponding change of a wave of people losing their jobs as this takes effect, as there was in California. Now, oftentimes in the discussions about minimum wage, what happens is that you have people who think one way, saying, "Well, it's all the politicians' fault for putting up the minimum wage, creating this price floor for businesses that forces um, the businesses to pay more, right?" And that is an element of that. But think about the last few years. What's happened in the last few years? You've had COVID in 2020, the lockdowns from 2020 through at least 2021. You've had people's views about interacting in public, especially restaurants and certain other businesses specifically. You've had that change over time as well, and how they interact and where they shop and how much they shop and how often they go out. And all of that, as you probably have seen, has disrupted a couple things. It's disrupted businesses, generally speaking. There were, I can't remember the exact number, but it was something like between 300,000 to 400,000 businesses that went out of business because of COVID. And then the businesses that did survive had a lot of debt that they had to carry from maybe taking out loans to pay their rent or their insurance, their employees that they actually kept on, whatever the case is, and their savings was wiped out so they can also pay for those expenses. You also had individuals, business owners who were in business and ran businesses and were part of the quote essential businesses that they classified in some cities, which to me was kind of like, a business is essential or non-essential. Like, I feel like Stanley from The Office.
Boy, have you lost your mind? Because I'll help you find it.
Okay. Have you lost your mind? Like, how is it possible for a business to be essential? What does essential mean? Kind of grappled with that locally myself, with the businesses that I had here during that time that we were classified as non-essential, and we're not going to talk about that in this stream because that's all another debate. So you have the tail of the COVID effect on small businesses. You have another business environment where the minimum wages has been set and is going up and has been going up for a long period of time. And then you have the tax exemption going away. It is like, you put all these ingredients in a stew, it's going to be really hard for restaurant owners to actually function. And what do we know about restaurant businesses? What do we know? We know that restaurant businesses tend to have the lowest margin of most businesses out there. Restaurants are typically volume businesses, meaning that they have to have so many people coming through their doors in order to survive. And they operate on very low margins. And so whatever margins that they actually have get squeezed. Think about this. If at the beginning in 2015, when they established the rates, which I'm going to splash over my face right now, this is probably not a part of any kind of production class to splash graphics over your face. I'm going to do it because what kind of a raw and gritty live stream. Look at this. So this right here, what we're looking at is this was the progressive increase in minimum wage when this was enacted in 2015. And these are the milestones that the city had to hit over that 10-year period coming to 2025. So the minimum wage in 2017 for small employees was $13 an hour or $11. Now, what's the difference between the left side and the right side? The difference that you're noticing from the left side and the right side is that if an employer paid the individual employee medical benefits, that employee or that employee owned tips, they could pay that legally. They could pay that employee a little bit less while they were working for that company. So the employees on the right, if they had no benefits or they didn't earn tips, that was their minimum wage. The number on the left is if that person did get tips or they did have medical benefits. That's what the minimum wage was. So $11. We're going to take the ones that didn't have that had tips or medical benefits. 11, 11.50, 12, 13.50, 15, 15.75, 16.50, 17.25, and 20.76. I'm going to be honest with you. None of those increases actually make any sense, and they are so wildly different. It's crazy. Some years the minimum wage went up 50 cents, and other years it went up $3. Like, how do you determine the step up margin for each level? It doesn't make any sense at all, and in fact, it really does hurt business owners, because if the step up is 20%, if you're used to a 10% step up, 7% step up, and then one a year it goes up 20%, that's a big increase. And if you don't think so, think about it this way. If, as a business owner, you had fixed costs for payroll that were $100,000 a year, and just due to a shift in minimum wage policy, that the minimum wage now went up 20%, your fixed $100,000 payroll cost goes up $20,000. And so that's $20,000 that always comes from the profit side of the business, if there is profit. So remember, restaurants are notoriously low margin businesses. So now that restaurant owner is giving up that notoriously low margin for the sake of for the minimum wage, right? So they already have a notoriously low margin, and now the profit from that low margin is getting even further eroded because of the minimum wage. You can think whatever you want about it, but the reality of minimum wage hikes is that there is going to be something that happens. Here's what the mayor had to say about the minimum wage hike. So let me just make this big because I don't have my glasses. I have to read it for you. The mayor said that Seattle is one of the highest minimum wages in the country. So let me just say this. Just being proud to change the law just because you want to be on the record books for something, generally speaking, is not a good reason to actually make a change. There should be some kind of overriding net positive effect across the board linearly on the entire environment, as opposed to being willing to sacrifice some members of a group because you decided to just elongate or you just decided that you want to make history, right? That's just a fundamental principle I have. Okay, so Seattle is one of the highest minimum wages in the country. It says this is a good thing for workers, a good thing for our overall economy, and something we should take pride in. As one of the leading members of the original team who developed Seattle's groundbreaking minimum wage legislation, my mission is the same now as it was then. Ensuring Seattle is both a great place for workers and a great place for small business. The problem today is that every person who's a small business owner in Seattle, do they feel like they're winning? Think about the mayor's words and what he or she is saying. He is saying, I think his name is Bruce Harrell. Think about what the mayor is saying here. He said it was a good win for the worker. Fine. Workers need to win. He said it was a good win for the environment, or the overall landscape of the environment. Fine. The environment, the landscape should win, right? And he said it was a good win for small businesses. But is it really? Is it really a good win for small businesses? It's like that GIF where Morpheus tries to jump from one rooftop to the other and lands in the garbage because he missed. You didn't see that episode of the Matrix?
Free your mind.
You're winning until you don't win, and then that's a problem. So right now, it seems like two of the specific targets are being met, but the third target is not being met, the winning for the small business owner. So that's kind of what I'm keen on thinking about right now. Let's go back to the mayor's words. Said that on January 1st, the temporary tip credit for small businesses will expire. This was the credit I was telling you about that with tips, they got an exemption, so they didn't have to pay the extra because it was being paid by the customer who's tipping. So while this is the right thing for wage fairness, we recognize it will present a significant change for many small businesses who are still recovering from the impacts of the pandemic and the resulting record inflation. This is not just a change, this is a wholesale throw yourself down the stairs thing, right? This is like a landscape shift and not just a change. So a little understated, I think, in my opinion. It continues, our office convened discussions to help address the concerns of all stakeholders. As the tip credit expires, we are committed to aggressively addressing many of the pressures facing small restaurants moving forward, from public safety to inflation, insurance, and a wide array of other cost pressures, including best practices in addressing the absence of a tip credit. So, how does the absence of a tip credit, how did they put downwards pressure on business owners? Like, you see, it's a domino effect. So, this is how economics works. You put the price floor in, which is the minimum wage, meaning you can't go below this floor. So here's how much you have to pay your workers. The small business owner comes out and says, "Well, let me think about this, like, fact that I have to pay these workers now, which is going to cut into my profit, right?" And then what happens then is that to make up for the fact that the small business owners aren't happy, that small business owners are shutting down or firing all their workers, then you have to solve another problem that you just created, right? The hot lava ball you put in your boat, it was too hot to handle, so you just, instead of throwing it in the pond, you threw it in the bottom of your boat. Now you have a hole in the boat you have to patch. You have to solve for that problem. Yeah, right? So it kind of created another issue, right? And now what's the other issue? The other issue is that now we have small business owners shutting down, firing workers. So now what's going to happen? Well, then if a politician if they have a strategy that's prone to putting in price controls, they're going to say, well, let's cap business insurance. So business insurance premiums can't go up higher than, let's say, X. But we know what happens when you put caps or price controls on certain businesses who are very dialed in, especially insurance. If you take a look at the video I did last week on the California LA wildfires, I talk about in that video how one of the reasons why insurance companies decided to leave California was not just because of the fact that it would cost them more to insure the homes because that area was prone to natural disaster, but it was also because that the state of California capped them at being able to charge increased premiums. So they couldn't actually, according to their math, impose the metrics that they wanted to or increase the premiums to the level that they wanted to based off of the potentiality for wildfires happening because it was a cap. So what happens? A business that ruthlessly audits its financials is just going to pack up its bags and hit the road and just say, we're going to insure in 49 or 48 or 47 other states, and we're just not going to insure in this one. So I'm not making an argument for whether they should do that or not. I'm not making an argument about whether it's right or wrong. That's for you to discuss in the comments. I'm just observing the fact that this happens, and the result of this affects many different people. And the point of this monologue is that if you, as an observer of this whole situation, takes a look at it, and you kind of are, if you look at it, take a dispassionate look at this situation, what you're going to find is you're going to find the fact that when you start controlling one price in order to bring as a politician or a lawmaker, what ends up happening is they have to control a bunch of other prices in order to make the environment sustainable enough for business to make a profit in long term. And that's where it starts to get tricky. Let's continue. So the mayor continues, I will be continuing our conversations with small businesses to identify tangible and actionable ways that we can help make Seattle more affordable. We want successful, prosperous, and vibrant small businesses and entrepreneurs in our city. And we are committed to addressing these challenges, keeping existing small businesses here in Seattle, and ensuring this is a place where anyone has the opportunity to start a small business and succeed. Okay. So this brings me to another economic principle that I want to talk to you about, because I don't think that this mayor may have thought about that when he said it, which is opportunity cost. When a minimum wage or price control goes into effect, you lose opportunity costs that could add to your city, your town, your state, your country, whatever, right? Because it's not just the amount of people who live in the area that own small businesses or work there. It's also the amount of people who were thinking about moving to the West Coast and looking and deciding between Seattle, California, Nevada, whatever, and they want to bring their small business out west because they can work remotely and they want to be on the West Coast because it's easier for them to visit their clients. Well, now that person is going to be thinking, okay, well, what is the business environment like? Smart business owners, before they start businesses, think, what is the business environment like in the area that I'm supposed to be moving to, as opposed to just moving there and trying to figure it out the rest, once they get there. They think about this beforehand. So what opportunity cost the mayor is missing are the opportunity cost of how many businesses that would have moved to our city or our state are no longer moving there because they've decided to not come to Seattle, right? So that is an actual number as well. So that's something that I think personally that perhaps that mayor didn't think about, but here we are. Let's listen to another story. I don't dine in Seattle either because I live on the East Coast. But I mean, okay, so now what we're doing is we're kind of thinking about the ramifications, because here's on the Common Sense Show, the whole essence of this show is about common sense, right? Common sense solutions, common sense topics. It's just you and me talking about what's going on in the world of business, in the world and business. And here's what I think about. I think about the fact that businesses are going to have to um, I have my computer on my iMac microphone this entire time. I can't believe it. I think about the fact that businesses are going to have to close down. I think about the fact that people are going to lose their jobs. I think about the fact that it's not just the people losing their jobs because just because minimum wage has gone up. It's also that even the people, for instance, who would have stayed at the restaurant will lose their job because restaurants are going to be forced to stay within the margin to be profitable. The whole point of operating a business is operating a business that generates profit to the stakeholders. And the small business is the owner or investors, whatever the case is, and to return some of those profits also to the employees by way of maybe bonuses in addition to their wages, or whatever the case is. But here's what I want you to think about. I want you to think about this simple fact that let's say in this case, 10 employees cost you $100,000 a year. Okay. You have to cut because, and then minimum wage goes into effect. So 20% of your costs go up, or your payroll costs increase 20%. You can operate your business at a profit at $100,000, but at $120,000, it floats that margin, that profit way down, and it leaves you as the business owner with much less profit to actually put in the bank, to save, to invest, whatever the case, or to put back in your business so that your business can grow ultimately. So when your cost goes up 20%, you have no other choice but to bring it back down to $100,000. So you're going to get rid of however many employees it requires to go from $120,000, which is the minimum wage increase, back down to $100,000, which was your previous payroll. So now you have to be more efficient with fewer employees at $100,000. But that's not where the story ends. What do you do in 2025 to become more efficient when it comes to operating your business with fewer employees that can make you the same amount of money? You have to add automation. What happens when a company starts automating? As the company starts automating, what ends up happening is that they keep pushing for further automation. Why? Because it's the nature of business. It's like, okay, well, if I could automate this process right here and this process right here to bring that 120,000 down to $100,000, well, now why can't I automate these three other systems right here? And so that push for automation is just going to continue to roll on until that staff that could have worked maybe slightly harder, retained their jobs at the higher minimum wage, are now going to lose their jobs too. So it's going to offset the jobs that would have normally been around because there's going to be even more automation at a cheaper price that's coming in. And you know what? I have to guess whether or not that is a possibility for these small businesses or these restaurants in Seattle, because it's literally what happened in California. And we already have case studies of restaurants opening in California where the owner decided to automate. Let's take a look.
Told y'all. This is already starting to happen. The minimum wage goes up, the investment in AI goes up as well. The investment in automatic payments, I mean, automatic servers, cookers, fryers goes up like way up. And next thing you know, people are out of jobs. And yeah, it says that 62% of restaurants were understaffed, but it said that automation could, if you remember the stat, can actually do 82% of the jobs that are needed to be done in in restaurants as well. So automation's coming, and unfortunately, those people who were left behind, they're going to end up losing their job, right? And it's a sad fact, but it just kind of is what it is. And so when you look, when you have these price controls go in, this is kind of what happens. This is the response. This will happen in Seattle. If you are a industrial engineering firm and you can make these industrial robots for restaurant chains, you're about to make a ton of money. A ton of money. And like a lot of people are, kind of looking forward to that. So but we'll see. I wanted to share something that I thought was interesting, because there's often debate about the jobs that are lost during a wage hike, like we're experiencing in Seattle, like they experienced in California with the minimum wage going up over $20. And I wanted to share an article from an economist who, by the way, so after I read this, I thought this article was so cool. After I read this, I said, I have to keep this guy on the show. So I reached out to him this morning, and guess what? This afternoon, he messaged me back. And he's coming on, and I'm going to interview him about minimum wage. He is an economist. He works for a firm called Edgeworth Economics in Washington, D.C. And we're going to talk all about minimum wage on Thursday. It's not going to be a long conversation. It's only going to be about 30 minutes because, economics can get kind of boring if you're not like really, really interested in it. But I did want to have a conversation with an expert about it so that we can kind of get some crystallization over what could be coming and what it looks like and all the arguments that people generally have. But before I have that interview with him on Thursday, I wanted to share with you an article that he wrote that I found fascinating. And the reason why I find this fascinating to share is because there are always two arguments when it comes to minimum wage. There's one side that says, oh, like, yeah, it's not as bad as you think. And there's the other side that typically says, yeah, it's way worse than you think. And as always, the truth always lies somewhere in the middle, or the truth needs to be explained just a little bit more to get a little bit more context. And I find that's what he did. So here's what he's wrote, and I wanted to read it to you. So this is not about the just so you know, this is not about the minimum wage hike in California. In Seattle. This is about the minimum wage hike in California. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to share with you how people frame arguments about minimum wage, just because on the Common Sense Show, you and we use common sense. And I want you to take a critical, dispassionate look at these topics, just like I do when I look at it. But I want to give you the full story so that, we're all on the same page and that you're armed with just information that you may not have had before. So this is about just the tenor of the conversation about minimum wage in California. So Dr. Bronner's writes, the recent 25% increase in California's minimum wage from 16 to 20 for limited service restaurants, including fast food restaurants, coffee shops, and juice bars, with at least 60 locations nationwide, has sparked controversy. In late March, the Wall Street Journal reported that nearly 10,000 jobs were lost between the signing of the minimum wage law in September 2023 and January 2024, although the law did not take effect until April 1st. The job loss figures were repeated by the Hoover Institution and the California Business and Industrial Alliance. Earlier this month, a columnist for the Los Angeles Times claimed that these job figures are fake numbers and a flagrant misrepresentation of government employment figures. These criticisms were repeated by other websites. So there is the nature of the conversation. On one side, you had the Wall Street Journal report that nearly 10,000 jobs were lost. LA Times and the columnists and other websites were repeating that these are fabricated numbers. There is no way that that's possible. You've taken the government numbers and you have, you've amplified them to like something that's not even real. And this economist says, like, now, wait a second. Let's just kind of break this down. So he said in this column, he attempts to resolve this controversy by providing rough estimates of the job losses and limited service restaurants in California between the signing of the bill in late September 2023 and April 2024 when it became effective. Although more rigorous methods and a more comprehensive study will be required to accurately measure the impact of the California minimum wage increase, I report results from a simple version of the method likely to be used by researchers who will study this issue. I find evidence consistent with between 5,000 and 10,500 jobs losses in California even before the minimum wage took effect. As explained below, I expect even more substantial job losses in the months ahead as employment is measured after the $20 minimum wage was mandated. So essentially, what he did in this column is he basically deciphered that there was going to be between about 5,000 and 10,500 jobs lost, as you mentioned. But when a minimum wage is increased in a city, town, state, whatever, it has a trailing effect. So there's an initial wave of people who lose their jobs initially, as I can tell you from a business owner's perspective, and if you're a business owner watching this, we're probably vibing on the same page, right? Because you take preemptive action to prevent your business from taking a nosedive immediately. So what's the first thing that you know or that you do when prices increase? You do one of two things to balance a budget. You either cut expenses, in this case, payroll expenses, human labor, or you increase your income. And how do you do that in a restaurant setting? You raise your menu prices and charge everybody more to lessen that gap from the increase to where you are now. So there's always a trailing effect. So I think that as we go through this article, what we're going to see is that there was like an initial wave of things that happened, but the full impact of that is still not known yet. And so while that means that the numbers that people are reporting on are going to be a moving target a bit, but they should kind of start coming into focus over time as we start thinking about what's going on. But for anyone writing articles and anyone who says definitively that they know right now what's happened, other than kind of what's been reported by people explicitly, we just don't know. And to them, and like the LA Times columnists that were just like, those numbers are false and fabricated. Anyone who talks in absolutes gets this from me.
I will break my foot off in your John Brown hind parts.
Thank you, Denzel. Yes, we don't know the extent of the full scope yet, but we'll find out. Okay, let's continue. So, so he focused on the average employment from October 2023 to March 2024. He said that this 6 months period between the signing of and implementation of the minimum wage law to mitigate the variability in monthly data. Neither the state of California nor the Bureau of Labor Statistics report seasonally adjusted employment figures for limited service restaurants in California. So I use seasonally unadjusted data and measure year-over-year changes to account for the impact of seasonal effects. So he's just kind of talking us through the method that he used to do this. Let's get to the meat. It says employment growth in limited service restaurants in California increased by 1.18% from the previous year, October 22nd, to March 2023. This does not mean a higher minimum wage caused more employment growth in the prior year, October 2021 to March 2022 to October 2022 to March 2023. Employment grew by 4.29%. Limited service restaurant employment declined by 3.11%. So from 4.29% to 1.1% after the $20 minimum wage law was signed. So, an important note. So we have our first kind of milestone or our first tentpole there. Initially, employment, generally speaking, went up year over year, but then after that law was signed, it contracted back 3.11% across California, right? He said that the 3.11% decline in limited service restaurant employment was not simply caused by a higher minimum wage. Business cycle conditions and the reopening of businesses after COVID-19 may have also contributed to the change. One possible benchmark, employment growth in all other private sector industries in California, declined by 1.69% over the same period from 2.20 to 0.5. So it's important to know that during the same period that is being measured, that job growth across other sectors in California also declined, right? So yes, the minimum wage law was signed, and yes, employment contracted for to limited service by limited service restaurants, but employment contracted in other areas of the economy as well. So not just limited service restaurants, it also declined in tech and whatever construction. Employment started contracting across California. So this means employment growth in limited service restaurants declined by more than 1.4%, 3.11 compared to 1.69, relative to other industries in California after the minimum wage law was signed, but before it took effect. A version of this differencing method is often used by economists to attempt to isolate the impact of a policy change that applies to a specific industry or state. So now, kind of entering in this variable into the equation, although employment declined across the board, across other industries, like I just described, it declined slightly more for restaurants, the limited service restaurants that we're talking about here, after the bill was signed. So between the period that the bill was signed, the period that it went to effect, jobs were being shed across California. However, jobs were being shed across California even more so in limited service restaurants, right? Because there are approximately 735,000 limited service restaurant employees in California, the 1.4% drop in employment growth in California implies that 10,500 jobs were lost after the minimum wage law was signed, but before it took effect. This is consistent with the job losses reported in the March Wall Street Journal article. Employment in other industries in California is just one benchmark for estimating employment in limited service restaurants in California. But for the signing of the $20 minimum wage law, California could also be compared to other states, where limited service restaurant employment growth declined by 2.43% over the same period. California's limited service restaurant employment decline was 0.67% more than the contemporaneous decline in the same industries elsewhere in the United States. So essentially, he took a tack almost kind of similar to what real estate agents do when they're doing CMAs on property values, is if you can look at a narrow scope of when houses were sold in the last 6 to 12 months, like on the street, if there were no houses that were sold in the last 6 to 12 months on your street, then you kind of just open up the aperture just a little bit more, you go out a little wider, and then you go to see how many homes were sold in the area, like in the neighborhood. If there were no homes sold in the area, you open up the aperture a little bit more, and then how many homes were sold in the town in the last 6 to 12 months, and you kind of go out. And that allows you to compare and contrast. And so what he did is he went out to see, okay, did these limited service restaurant jobs, did they shed jobs in other states? So he opened up the aperture to other states to compare it to California during the same period of time. And what he found was they shed jobs during this period too. But California was still higher in shed jobs than even comparative states in the comparative industry that we're talking about, right? So that's kind of where we are. He said that these rough estimates mean that between 5,000 and 10,500 jobs were lost before the minimum wage took effect. A discussion over methods for refining these estimates and improving their accuracy should not distract attention from more important issues. The $20 minimum wage will harm some of California's least experienced workers by making them substantially more expensive and no more productive to businesses that have traditionally hired young workers into their first jobs. A higher minimum wage targeted specifically to businesses that disproportionately employ inexperienced workers will result in a substantial number of jobs losses and reduced work hours for young workers, higher prices for consumers and economic costs, and damages for businesses. So essentially, the jobs that um, the jobs that were traditionally for younger workers, people who got paid a little bit less, now these people are getting paid way more, and their skill level of this cohort has not gone up, right? Like, it's not like they became rocket scientists who are working at McDonald's making $20 an hour. It's still the same pimply faced teenager who is in junior year of high school looking for a job and traditionally made lower wages because one of those members of the cohort, that team that's working at a fast food restaurant, they got more out of working there than just their salary, right? Just their $10 an hour. Like, if we just kind of strip this down to basic principles, basically what happened is, first order principles, you want your teenager. I have an adult and I have a teenage kid. You want them to learn how to work, that they have to pay taxes, how to save some of their money, maybe invest some of it. You want them to get the reps up to learn that they need to be resilient, go to work, deal with other people. So, like, as a teenager, there's more stuff that they're learning than just the, whatever, the $7, $8, $9 job that they're getting. But now that group of people, the teenage group, is now getting paid commensurate with someone with a slightly higher skill set, perhaps someone who's a manager at a department store or a retail store, and it doesn't really match what they're being asked to do. So, again, what a restaurant owner is going to do, right? They're not going to just sit there. People respond to incentives. If you incentivize by someone to take an action, like you raise the minimum wage, business owners are going to be incentivized to kill those jobs. They're going to go out of business, then go broke, right? Like, for instance, they're not going to throw money down. They're not going to sit there and wait 5 years as their money slowly dwindles away in order to, satisfy the fact that they have to pay this minimum wage. They'd rather just rather than shut their doors. I made this much money, move on to the next venture, or automate completely and put that automation into their restaurants and just get rid of, across the board, of the people who are working those kind of lower skill jobs. So, anyways, that was about California, but it was really a larger discussion about how people even talk about these issues when it comes to minimum wage, right? My point in sharing that with you is because I wanted you to think about how oftentimes there's nuance and there's more to it, and it's just not like the big issue. But there's something I actually want to talk to you about, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this in the chat or in the comment section. Will the minimum wage, okay, so let's say that this minimum wage came to your state. I'm assuming not everyone who watches this show is from California, right? Would you tip less? I want to know that. If you knew, and now that it's public and everyone's going to know, that the minimum wage has gone up to almost $21 an hour, and the person serving you is making that much money, does this now mean that you are going to tip less to the employees there? I want to hear your thoughts on that. Are you going to be more inclined or less inclined to actually give tips to restaurant workers now that they're making more money? I think that tipping is going to go way down. It's going to crater, because before, when people largely knew that waitresses, waiters earn a slightly lower wage, and it kind of incentivized them to kind of give more because they wanted to be more helpful. But I think that now that people are making more money, I think a person's money is actually, I think it's possible that a waitress's or waiter's money is going to decrease. This is my theory. Why? Because people are going to tip less. And when you extrapolate out or divide out that all the tips they were getting prior to this law going in effect, and the amount of people who are going to stop tipping actually goes through, when you kind of extrapolate out to their per hour pay, I think that these workers are going to get paid way less, and they're going to leave the industry. And that will be another reason. Now that will be a recession of workers in a sense, because they're going to be getting paid a lot less. The money's going to go down. Where they may have made, let's call it $15 an hour plus tips, and then that would have brought them up with the tipping to, let's say, $23, $24 an hour. Now minimum wage is $20. Tipping creators, and maybe they only make $2, $1 or $2 an hour. So they went from making $25 an hour to now making like 21, 22 with tips. I can see that also being an effect on waitresses and waiters who rely on those tips, in a larger amount. Another reason why tips are going to go down is because the price of food is going to go up. So as the price of food goes up, I'm sure there's a corresponding, well, this is just anecdotal. I don't have any evidence to back this up, but this is just my gut feeling, that as the cost of food goes up, the cost of the amount of tips go down naturally, right? No one's going to pay $1 million for a burger, a waffle, a piece of chicken, and then want to pay $1 million with a $500 tip, right? Like it's just not gonna. It doesn't work that way, right? So when restaurant owners raise their prices because they have to meet their margin, now we're gonna suppress what was a $25 an hour potentially that a waiter was bringing home. Now they're only going to be making $20 an hour. So it's possible that their ability to earn might get negatively affected by this as well. That's my gut. I want to know what you think. Would this affect your tips for waiters at restaurants, knowing what you know about this minimum wage law? I say yes. I think there's going to be a big corresponding impact on how people tip. I know that it will but I personally think that tipping has gone out of control right now. Out of control. Like everything has a tipping mechanism on it. Like everything that you swipe now has a tipping feature on it. I can't book my haircut with my barber until I tip. I have to tip first. What if I don't like the haircut? What if the haircut absolutely sucks? How about that? How about them apples? What if he's having an off day and I can't get a good lineup? Well, I didn't brush my hair. I should have for this stream. But what if I can't get a good lineup? What if he doesn't fade me right? I still have to pay for it? I don't know. I guess we're gonna have to just wait till some time passes and see kind of how it goes. But I feel like those employers are still going to be in the short end of the stick between the job losses, businesses closing, and their earnings per hour possibly potentially going down based off what I explained. I don't know. We'll have to see. I'll be monitoring though to see how it goes. So some upcoming things I wanted to share with you. The first thing is that I do have, so that article that we just read about the wages in California and the debate about numbers. I invited that economist on the show, and he accepted, and he will be coming on the show on Thursday. So I'm interviewing him Thursday at, I believe it's 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Let me just check. Yes, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Thursday, the 16th. Okay. And we're going to be talking about the article that he wrote and then my questions about minimum wage. So if you want to hear from a professional, a doctor of economics, on Thursday, I'll be talking to Economist about minimum wage and kind of its impact, and oof, we'll get into it, and I'll show him some of the videos that we saw today. But I'm really interested to know how he, frankly, feels about the effects that it might have, and see. I want to test my theories too to see if my theories might be right. So that's that, and then also the next thing I wanted to let you know that you might have noticed that my background is looking kind of janky, right? I am in the process of renovating my podcast studio here, and so although it may be a slight mess right now, it's gonna get better. And you know, to that I say, wait and see. I have some awesome things in store for 2025, and I'm excited about what I have coming. I'm going to have some unique guests. I'm going to try to balance my interviews with what I talk about my Monday night live show. But I want you to come back Monday nights, 8:30 p.m. I'm live here. We're going to be covering some of the Business Wire, some of the news that we have going out. I'm going to be covering some even some how-tos. I'm throwing how-tos in my live Mondays, probably like once or twice a month. I'm going to be doing how-tos, and I'll be reacting to TikToks, of course, like I always do, business TikToks, of course, and the latest business news. But anyways, that's what I have going for this evening. I appreciate you tuning into the show tonight. Thank you for watching. And until next time, if you don't go about doing your business, you're going to be doing the business of someone else. I will see you Thursday at 1 o'clock. As the credits roll, though, I want you to think about one thing. Have you ever had troubles with adversity and negativity, overcoming extreme adversity and not knowing how to deal with it? I interviewed an Arctic explorer. He's an expeditionist. And this man has been to the South Pole. This man has been to the North Pole. And this man has been to Everest multiple times. And he told a story in that interview that would blow your mind. His iPod, yes, iPod, like it's an old story. His iPod stopped working. His knee was hurting. And he was about 300 miles or so, maybe a little more than 300 miles, maybe 400 miles away from the South Pole. You know how he got there? They helicoptered him in, they dropped him in, and it left. He was the only person around for 800 miles. And he explains in an interview how he was able to get to the South Pole despite the fact that his knee was hurting, his iPod stopped. Like, it was a real great conversation. The explorer's name is Mark Wood. Awesome conversation. And he brings you along for the whole ride. He has multiple stories like that. And we even look at some videos as I'm talking to him about some of the aspects of his expeditions, including his encounter with the polar bear and how he kind of survived that. So I want you to take a look at that. That will be the end screen video. Click on that, watch that interview with Mark Wood, and I'll see you Thursday at 1 o'clock for my interview with the Economist to talk about this minimum wage issue. If you don't go about doing your business, you're going to be doing the business of someone else. I'm Micah, and I'm out of here. Talk to you later.